What's going on, Flare community? This is Patty XRP with the DeFi Standard, and we're here to give you our first breakdown of the FTSO rewards, how they're going to work, what are some possible numbers you could see. This is all driven by a lot of different variables that can happen, as we'll see as we go into it further. But just a quick refresher, the Flare Time Series Oracle is an on-chain mechanism for the Flare network to bring in external price data feeds on-chain to ensure, accurate pricing for things like the F assets. And it could be, for gold or stocks in the future as well. And even more interestingly, you could pull in data estimates basically like Fahrenheit temperature, Celsius temperature, anything else you could come up with. As long as it fits into the parameters of the FTSO, that's something that can be used in the future. And let's say maybe you could use temperature in a derivative for farmers who are trying to hedge a poor crop season. That's a very broad thing and probably more long term when it comes to this network. But if we start seeing the commodities markets move on, then that could be a big deal in the future. So I'm going to start off here with how the compensation works for the FTSO. So basically, Spark, everybody that owns Spark is going to have a detachable vote. This is part of programmable money that's advancing in the crypto space. And it allows you to maintain custody of your Spark token while simultaneously earning yield by helping to provide these data estimates to the FTSO. This is risk-free from a financial sense, as you don't need to move the Spark from your wallet or whatever application you have it in. It's a detachable vote. That's just a really key part. So you can think of this as risk-free yield that you're earning. And with that, we don't know necessarily how often per day the FTSO is going to send out rewards. However, you could see here, if there's 10 time series, which is like each closure of the FTSO, and they decide that every 10 closures, basically, that an award's going to be given out, and the FTSO is going to be closing, many times throughout the day, every few seconds. So, they'll pick a random number between 1 and 10 if they decide that's the award period. And then whatever the random number is for that award period, that's the one that will be getting the rewards. So if you're part of the, accurate data estimates that go through for that given time series, then you'll be rewarded with Spark, which comes via inflation. So basically, the Flare Oracle acts as an inflation mechanism for the network, increasing the Spark token supply and rewarding the Spark token holders who provide good estimates to the FTSO. And they state that it is the equivalent of mining. Additionally, it transfers value from people who do not participate in the system or who participate in a malicious fashion to people who provide utility to the network. So currently, one of the problems people have with inflation in our traditional markets is that, when they print new dollars, it's normally going to massive corporations, hedge funds, rich individuals, and people of that nature, not necessarily to the working class or your average, let's say, American for the sake of the Federal Reserve. And whenever they print new money, it dilutes our purchasing power, as the money we are holding currently is now worth less and prices are increasing. So what this does is, we're going to have a bunch of individuals and, you want to say the citizens of Flare Network. If you're participating, then you're going to get that, and participating in a beneficial way to the network by providing good data estimates, which can be done through delegating your vote to signal providers that you find give accurate prices to the FTSO. It's going to give you the inflation, which, while that's inflating the supply, but you're increasing your supply of Spark as well, which will help to make up for that lack of purchasing power or the decrease in purchasing power you have. So that's one of the nice things about the inflation and why I wouldn't liken it necessarily to a central bank system right off the bat. So that's the first part. And then secondly here, that's really important to note. So the inflation rate for the first year of the Flare network is going to be 10% of the 100 billion originally minted Spark tokens. That means in the first year that 10 billion Spark tokens could be newly minted and delivered through the FTSO, which would result in a supply of 110 billion Spark after 1 year. However, not all of this is going to be circulating. As we know, the distribution is tiered out over a 3-year period. The Flare Foundation holds around 20 billion Spark, and they're only allowed to use it to fund their operations, essentially. So that's important to note. And also they provided a chart here. So since the least amount of Spark is going to be available on day 1 for the FTSO, that means the yield is going to be at its highest point in the first month and start decreasing over time, as you can see this red line on the chart here. So it's really important to start acting on that early, because as this network gets more mature, there's going to be less reason to highly incentivize the FTSO over time. And then additionally, you can see here, this is the token supply over time with the staggered distribution. So at around the year 3 mark, there'll be just shy of 140 billion newly minted tokens, or not newly minted, but rather total supply of Spark. So just so people have an idea on that. I also want to go back and touch on one thing above here. So after the first 6 months, the Spark holders can do a parameter governance vote on the inflation rate and reduce it from 10%. So, we could take that all the way down to 1% or 5%. And it's going to be dependent on many factors. If the network's growing really fast and the price of Spark is moving up, then you don't really need to have as high a percentage, as the Spark that people are earning is going to have more USD value. So it may not need to be as high going forward after that. So that was just a primer for what we're going to get into now. So we're going to look at kind of what the rewards look like and how they're calculated. So here's the calculation I created to determine what your rewards are going to be for a given FTSO closure or reward period based on those data time series we were talking about earlier. So in the case of this formula down here, we have our first variable F and then U. So that's the user Spark votes. And then we're going to have the FTSO success rate. So that's how often your detachable Spark votes are being chosen by the FTSO to be rewarded. And then we're going to have FE, which is the eligible Spark votes. So think of that as the total circulating supply of Spark minus anything that's held by the Flare Foundation. Or still in a rewards pool that hasn't been distributed yet, like the F asset rewards pool or the FLTC rewards pool. The next part will be the Spark participation rate. So how many of the eligible Spark votes are actually participating in FTSO voting? Some products may not allow you to use your detachable FTSO vote, so that would be discounted there. And then also, if you're holding your Spark on an exchange, it's kind of TBD on which exchanges will allow you to use your Spark token functionality in the future. So if people are on the exchanges trading, they're going to miss out on this daily yield. And then the final part is the FTSO daily Spark rewards. So in short, you're going to take your user Spark votes, multiply it by your success rate, then divide it by the eligible Spark votes times the participation rate, and then you're going to multiply that times 50%. And that's because when the FTSO goes through the data, it looks for the median 50% of Spark votes to determine what the price is going to be, and then rewards those Spark holders that were in that median 50%. So we have to truncate the supply when we do this finalized calculation. And then also this FR, the FTSO daily Spark rewards, which are going to be a little over 27 million daily. So that's just broken down from 10% over the course of a year divided by 365 and comes out to that number when you multiply the total supply of 100 billion. Cool. So now that you guys kind of see where this calculation is coming from, I'd be curious, if anybody else has looked into this, if you have different ways to calculate it, put it in the comments below. And, because there's definitely, there's different ways you can do this that I played around with. So far, I think this is the best one, which is why I'm going with it, but I'm always open to other opinions on that matter, especially when it comes to, what kind of yield you can get. It's a big deal for a lot of people. And I know A lot of people have been asking about it. Cool. So we're going to move over to the actual spreadsheet and just kind of disregard a lot of this. We're going to focus in on just a couple areas, as this is going to be the first of a series of a few videos on earning rewards via the different mechanisms on layer 1 of the Flare network. Cool. So if we go over here, we're going to say that our user essentially is going to get 10,000 Spark from the airdrop. So, they held about 10,000 XRP on the snapshot date back on December 12th, 2020. So they're going to have 10,000. However, since the launch Spark rate is only 15%, they'll only have 1,500 that they can use on the first day. And then each month going forward, on average, they'll get 3%. The way that's decided is the FTSO every month is going to pick a pseudo random number between 2 and 4%, and that's what's going to be released. So that's why the time that Spark will be released to you from the airdrop maybe, I think it's 25 months to 34 months, just depending on if 4% gets chosen a lot randomly, then it will be faster. If it's 2% a lot, then it can take longer. So we just go with 3% as an average here. And then you can see right here, the FTSO daily rewards rate is 0.027%, which brings, if you multiply that by 100 billion, the total supply originally minted, that's a little around 27 million. It's a little above because this decimal goes farther. Cool. So keep in mind that our user has 10,000 Spark as their official airdrop, and they'll be getting 1,500 on the first day. You can see here on our Spark distribution page, user will start with 1,500, and then every 30 days, they'll get 300 more added, to where at the end of 180 days, they would have 3,300 Spark delivered to them at that point. I'm only modeling out 180 days because, how I mentioned earlier, that there could be parameter changes via Spark governance on the inflation rate. So I don't want to model over a super long period of time when I know there's going to be changes coming. And as we get closer to that, I'll start changing it up, and we'll have more ideas of like how the network's working 6 months into launch. So it'll be much different scenario at that point. And then to move into the meat of this spreadsheet here, this is where we're calculating our rewards and their compounding. I do want to note for this example, I'm not including any F asset rewards and compounding them in. This is just strictly if all you do is participate in the FTSO. So keep that in mind as well. And then going back here. So what we have here is the eligible Spark supply on day 1, which is 15% of the total amount of Spark being delivered to XRP holders via the airdrop, as well as 15% of the Flare limited team's allocation, which we can see I am estimating the XRP holder Spark to be 30 billion, which is based on a blog from the Flare team back in January that you can reference. And then Flare Limited is officially getting 25 billion Spark that they can use in the ecosystem. Cool. So back to here, you can see it's 8.25 billion on the first day. And then as this sheet goes on, it adds in the daily F asset rewards pools, as well as any new distributions of Spark from the airdrop every 30 days. And then we have our FTSO rewards, just a little over 27 million, as you can see here. And then as you remember back in that calculation that we went over, this is the participation rate. So you can see if 100% of the people participate on the day 1 and you had 1,500 Spark being used, then you would get 5 Spark on aggregate with a 50% FTSO success rate. So that's saying 50% of the time your Spark is chosen for a reward. So, not very high if it's 100%. However, I highly doubt that 100% of all Spark votes will be used in the FTSO at any time in the history of the entire Flare network. Odds are some of it's going to be on exchanges that can't be used or some kind of other area where you're unable to access that functionality of your Spark token. However, if we look here as we move over in 5% decreases in the participation rate, you can see that this amount starts going up to where at the end here, it starts exponentially increasing. So if only 5% of the people participated on day one in this, this scenario with these inputs, the user would get 99 Spark. So let's go down to the bottom and see what happens across the board if on average 5% only delegated their vote the entire 180 days versus 100% doing it. And ideally, I'll explain where I think it'll be somewhere in the middle. Cool. So this user would get 792 Spark over 180 days. And obviously here, like we said earlier, they don't have that much Spark at the beginning. So that's pretty decent yield if it's a worst case scenario and every single person's participating the entire time. But that's probably not going to happen. Now let's go to the best case scenario, which also isn't going to happen. But just so you can see, based on this calculation, if 5% of the Spark votes participated the whole time with you compounding what you earned, you would almost have 1 million Spark from an initially dropped 1.5 thousand Spark. Pretty crazy. I hope you can kind of see where participation is a huge driver in how much you get. So, what do I think on average over this entire time period? It's going to be somewhere in this range, probably, let's say like 85% on the high end to like 55% on the low end. So you could be earning anywhere from, just shy of 1,000 to 1,600 Spark, which, I mean, if you take that off your starting amount here, it's almost 2x. But if you go down to the end and use what you have there, it's like 50%. So, to me, that's pretty good yield. It's risk-free. So I'm not complaining about that. If I got 5% yield at risk-free over the course of a year, I'd be pretty excited. You can't really do that in financial markets anymore. So we're going to go back to the home page here. And we're going to play around with a couple of the variables and just see what they look like now that you guys kind of see how the spreadsheet operates. And so here, this is assuming you have an FTSO success rate of 50%. I know a lot of people I talk to are hoping this is higher, but the fact is the FTSO is truncating 50% of the data estimates every time. And like all the signal providers aren't going to have these super, skewed from each other data estimates, I would imagine, because they're pulling from a lot of the similar areas, whether it be exchanges, other oracles, directly on chain, for like XRP, XLM, Litecoin, Dogecoin, all those things. So, I'm kind of thinking your FTSO success rate over the long haul will be around 50%. Now, you might be able to, move your delegations around daily and find signal providers that are performing better on a daily basis. That's going to be a lot to manage for most people. So we'll leave it at 50% for this example. And then we're just going to say some different, well, we'll leave it. We'll leave the FTSO participation rate at 65%. So in this scenario where the person had 10,000 Spark at the beginning, and obviously they got 1,500 on day one, they end up with 1,300 Spark over 6 months. Now let's just move this up to some larger amounts because I know there's people that are going to have more Spark than this. So if you go up to 25,000, they would end up with 3,300. So you can see it's kind of the same percentage gain that you're getting, but if you have a larger quantity, you're obviously going to have a lot more access to the rewards by nature of being more exposed to having one of your votes be in the official price that the FTSO puts out. So this is kind of our first foray into doing this. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully the calculation makes sense. If you have questions, please put it down in the comments and I'll address them. And this is something that's going to evolve over time as we get more info. And appreciate you guys for listening. I'm Patty XRP, and this is the DeFi Standard. I'll catch you in the next one for this series. Bye.